It was a hot summer afternoon in downtown Atlanta when Staff Sergeant James Cooper walked towards his favorite hot dog stand. The sun was bright in the sky, and sweat ran down his face. He had just finished a hard training session at the nearby army base and wanted to eat his favorite chili dog. James was a tall man with short black hair and strong muscles from years of military training. He always wore his clean army uniform with pride. At 35 years old, he had served in the army for 15 years and been to war twice. Many people respected him in the area, especially Mike, the old hot dog stand owner. Mike's hot dog stand was a simple place with a few metal tables and chairs outside. It had been there for 20 years, and everyone loved Mike's special hot dogs. The smell of grilled onions and meat filled the air as James got closer. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since early morning. There weren't many people at the stand that day. An old lady sat at one table, carefully eating her hot dog with extra mustard. A young mother with 2 kids was leaving, and a businessman in a blue suit was checking his phone while waiting for his order. It was peaceful, just how James liked it. James wore his combat boots, which made soft sounds on the concrete as he walked. His uniform had dust on it from training, but he didn't mind. He was thinking about getting 2 hot dogs today. He had worked extra hard at training. The afternoon sun made the metal tables shine, and a light breeze moved the red and yellow umbrella over Mike's stand. Mike saw James coming and smiled. He was already reaching for a fresh hot dog bun. The usual, Sergeant Cooper, he called out. Mike was short and round, with white hair and kind eyes. He wore the same white apron every day, now slightly stained with ketchup and mustard. Mike started preparing James's favorite chili dog before he even reached the stand. Just then, James heard something that made him stop. It was the loud sound of motorcycle engines, getting closer and closer. He turned his head to look at the street, where 3 big black motorcycles were slowing down near the hot dog stand. The bikes were Harley Davidsons, expensive ones, covered in chrome that reflected the sun. The 3 men on the motorcycles looked rough. They wore black leather vests with a gang patch that said, "Steel Serpents" on the back. Their arms were covered in tattoos, and their faces showed they were looking for trouble. The biggest one had a long gray beard and mean eyes. He was clearly the leader. James watched as they parked their bikes. He noticed how the old lady at the table grabbed her purse tighter, and the businessman quickly paid for his hot dog and walked away. Even the birds that usually begged for food crumbs flew away. The peaceful afternoon was about to change. Mike's smile disappeared when he saw the bikers. His hand shook a little as he put down James's hot dog. James could tell Mike had dealt with these men before, and it hadn't been good. The air felt different now, tense, like right before a storm. The bikers walked towards the stand, their heavy boots making loud steps. They pushed past the old lady's table, making her spill her drink. They laughed when she jumped up to avoid the spill. James felt his jaw tighten as he watched them. He hadn't planned on trouble today, but he could tell trouble had found this place. James stayed where he was, about 10 steps from the stand. He watched the bikers carefully, the way he had learned to watch for danger in war. His mind started thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. He hoped the bikers would just buy their food and leave, but something told him that wasn't going to happen. The biker with the gray beard looked straight at James, noticing his uniform. A mean smile spread across his face as he nudged his friends and pointed. James knew that look. He had seen it before, the look of someone who wanted to prove how tough they were by picking a fight with a soldier. As the bikers changed direction and started walking towards him instead of the hot dog stand, James took a deep breath. This peaceful afternoon was about to become very interesting. The 3 bikers stopped about 5 feet away from James. Up close, they smelled like cigarettes and old leather. The leader, with his gray beard, stood in the middle. He was taller than his friends but shorter than James. A snake tattoo crawled up his neck, and his vest had extra patches that showed he was in charge. Well, what do we have here?" the leader said, looking James up and down. A real-life army boy. His voice was rough, like he had been smoking for many years. The other 2 bikers moved to stand on either side of James, trying to make him feel trapped. James didn't move. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides, but his mind was alert. He noticed everything about these men. How the one on his left kept his weight on his back foot. How the one on the right had old boxing tape wrapped around his knuckles. These weren't just regular troublemakers. They knew how to fight. "Is there something I can help you gentlemen with?" James asked calmly. He spoke in a friendly way, but his eyes stayed sharp. Behind the bikers, he could see Mike reaching for his phone, probably to call the police. The old lady had moved her chair further away, but stayed to watch. The leader laughed, showing yellow teeth. "Oh, he's polite too," he said to his friends. "Listen here, soldier boy. They call me Snake." He pointed to his neck tattoo. "This is our neighborhood now, and we're tired of seeing you military types around here, acting like you own the place." James noticed more details as Snake talked. The biker on the left had a knife in his boot. He could see the handle sticking out. The one on the right kept touching his front pocket, probably checking a weapon there too. Things were getting more dangerous by the minute. "This is a public place," James said, still keeping his voice calm. "There's room for everyone. Why don't I buy you gentlemen some hot dogs? Mike makes the best ones in town." He was trying to give them a peaceful way out, but he could tell by their faces they weren't interested. Snake stepped closer, trying to use his size to scare James. "Maybe you're not hearing me right," he growled. "We don't want your charity. We want you to leave. And maybe leave your wallet behind as a goodbye gift." His friends laughed, moving a little closer too. The air felt heavy with tension. A small crowd had started to gather across the street, watching from a safe distance. Cars slowed down as they passed by, drivers trying to see what was happening. The sun felt hotter than before, and James could feel sweat on his back. James looked straight into Snake's eyes. "I'm going to say this once," he said quietly, so only the bikers could hear. "I don't want trouble. I just came for lunch. But if you're determined to start something, remember, you picked this fight, not me." Snake's face turned red with anger. Nobody talked to him this way, especially not in front of his men. He reached out and poked James hard in the chest with one finger. "Big words from a man about to get hurt real bad," he snarled. James didn't move when Snake poked him, but his muscles tensed, ready for what was coming. He could hear Mike in the background, talking quietly but urgently on his phone. The old lady had finally decided to leave, hurrying to her car. A cool breeze blew through the parking lot, making the stand's umbrella flutter. "Last chance," James said calmly. "Walk away now, and we can all enjoy our afternoon." He kept his hands visible but ready. In his mind, he was already planning his moves, remembering his training. He knew exactly what he would do if any of them attacked. Snake's answer was to crack his knuckles loudly. His friends moved even closer, making a tight circle around James. "No, soldier boy," Snake said with an ugly smile. "This is your last chance. Either you hand over your wallet and crawl away, or we're going to show you what real fighting looks like." The moment stretched out like a rubber band ready to snap. James could hear his own steady breathing, could feel his heart beating slow and strong. He had been in worse situations before, faced more dangerous enemies. These men thought they were predators, but they had no idea what real combat was like. As Snake pulled back his fist for the first punch, James knew this was going to be a lesson these bikers would never forget. Snake's fist came fast, but James was faster. 15 years of military training had taught him how to react without thinking. He moved his head slightly to the left, and Snake's punch missed by inches. The biker's eyes went wide with surprise. He wasn't used to people dodging his punches. Before Snake could pull his arm back, James grabbed his wrist and turned it just enough to make the bigger man lose his balance. Snake stumbled forward, trying not to fall. His two friends jumped into action, but they weren't ready for what happened next. The biker with the knife in his boot reached down to grab it, but James had been waiting for this. He stepped forward and kicked the knife away before the man could touch it. The weapon slid under a parked car, making a scraping sound on the concrete. The biker's face showed shock. How had the soldier moved so fast? The third biker, the one with the taped knuckles, threw a punch at James's head. James blocked it with his left arm and pushed the man back, making him bump into one of the metal tables. The table fell over with a loud crash, and people watching from across the street started taking videos with their phones. Snake had gotten his balance back and was even angrier now. "Get him," he shouted to his friends. All three bikers came at James at once. They thought their numbers would give them the advantage, but James had fought against worse odds in Afghanistan. James moved like water between the bikers' attacks. Every punch they threw seemed to miss by just a little bit. When they did hit him, it wasn't where they wanted to. He blocked, dodged, and redirected their energy, making them tire themselves out. His breathing stayed calm and steady while they started to pant. The biker who had lost his knife tried to grab James from behind. James dropped his shoulder and used the man's own weight to flip him over. The biker landed hard on his back, and the air rushed out of his lungs with a loud oof. He lay there, trying to remember how to breathe. Snake was getting frustrated. He had never seen anyone fight like this before. Usually, his size and strength were enough to win any fight, but this soldier moved differently. It was like trying to punch smoke. Every time Snake thought he had him, James wasn't there anymore. The biker with the taped knuckles pulled something from his pocket. Brass knuckles that shined in the sun. James saw this and knew the fight had become more dangerous. One good hit with brass knuckles could do real damage. He needed to end this quickly. "That's enough," Mike shouted from his hot dog stand. "The police are almost here." But the bikers didn't care. They were too angry now, too embarrassed in front of the growing crowd. They had to prove they were tough. James decided it was time to stop playing defense. When the biker with the brass knuckles charged at him, James stepped inside his guard. He used a move he had learned in hand-to-hand combat training, striking pressure points that made the man's arm go numb. The brass knuckles fell to the ground with a metallic ping. Snake tried to tackle James from the side, but James was ready. He shifted his weight and used Snake's momentum to send him flying over his hip. Snake crashed into his friend who was just getting up from the ground, and they both went down in a tangle of arms and legs. The crowd across the street cheered. James hadn't even broken a sweat yet. He stood calmly, watching as the bikers struggled to get up. His uniform was still clean. He hadn't even lost his hat during the fight. In the distance, police sirens were getting closer. The biker with the taped knuckles was holding his arm, which was still numb. The one who had lost his knife was sitting on the ground, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what had happened. Snake was the last to get up, his face red with shame and anger. "This isn't over, soldier boy," Snake growled, but his voice shook a little. He knew they had lost badly. James just looked at him calmly, hands still ready at his sides in case they wanted to try again. "It is over," James said quietly. "The only question is whether you leave now on your bikes or in the back of a police car. Your choice." The sirens were very close now, and blue lights could be seen at the end of the street. Snake looked at the blue police lights getting closer, then at his friends who were still hurting from the fight. His face changed from angry to worried. He had been in jail before and didn't want to go back. "Let's go," he shouted to his men, who quickly started moving toward their motorcycles. The bikers limped to their bikes, trying to look tough even though they were clearly beaten. The one with the numb arm had trouble starting his motorcycle, and Snake had to help him. They revved their engines loudly and sped away just as the first police car turned into the parking lot. 2 police cars pulled up, lights flashing. 4 officers got out, looking around at the mess from the fight. The overturned tables, the scattered chairs, and the small crowd of people still recording everything on their phones told them something big had happened. "Is everyone okay here?" the first officer asked. He was older, with gray hair showing under his police cap. His name tag said Officer Martinez. He looked at James, noticing his clean uniform and calm manner. "What happened, Sergeant?" James explained everything honestly. He told them about the bikers trying to start trouble, about their weapons, and how he had defended himself. The crowd from across the street came closer now, and many people wanted to tell the police what they had seen. "It was amazing," a young man said, showing Officer Martinez the video on his phone. "The soldier never even threw a punch. He just used their own strength against them." Other people nodded and shared their videos too. The police watched some of the recordings, looking impressed. Mike came out from behind his hot dog stand. "Those bikers have been causing trouble in this neighborhood for weeks," he told the police. "They tried to make me pay them protection money, but I refused. I was worried they would wreck my stand today, but Sergeant Cooper stopped them." The old lady who had left during the fight came back when she saw the police. "I saw everything," she said. "This brave soldier protected all of us. Those horrible men have been scaring people away from Mike's stand for too long." She patted James's arm and smiled at him. Officer Martinez wrote everything down in his notebook. "Do you want to press charges, Sergeant Cooper?" he asked. James thought about it for a moment. He looked at all the people around him. Mike, the old lady, the other customers who had been scared. "If they come back and cause more trouble, yes," James said. "But for now, I think they learned their lesson." He smiled a little, remembering how surprised the bikers had looked when their tough guy act didn't work. "I don't think they'll be bothering this place again." The other police officers were collecting the weapons the bikers had left behind, the knife from under the car and the brass knuckles from the ground. "We'll keep these as evidence," one officer said, "just in case those guys do come back." While the police finished their report, Mike started cleaning up his stand. James and some other people helped put the tables and chairs back in place. The crowd slowly went away, but not before many people shook James's hand and thanked him. "Your money's no good here anymore, Sergeant," Mike said when everything was back to normal. He handed James a hot dog, the same one he had been about to order before all the trouble started. "From now on, you eat free at Mike's Hot Dogs." James tried to refuse, but Mike wouldn't take no for an answer. The old lady also insisted on buying him a soda. Other customers came up to the stand now, feeling safe again. Some wanted to take pictures with James, but he politely said no. He didn't want to make a big deal about it. The police finished their work and got ready to leave. "We'll keep an eye on this area," Officer Martinez promised. "But something tells me those bikers won't be coming back to this neighborhood." He smiled and shook James's hand before getting in his car. James finally sat down at one of the tables with his hot dog. The afternoon sun was starting to get lower in the sky, making long shadows in the parking lot. Everything was peaceful again, just like he had wanted when he first walked up to the stand. He took a bite of his hot dog and smiled. It tasted even better than usual. The next morning, James drove past Mike's hot dog stand on his way to the base. He wasn't planning to stop, but what he saw made him pull over. A large crowd was gathered around the stand, bigger than he had ever seen before. He parked his car and walked closer to see what was happening. Mike was working faster than usual, making hot dogs as quickly as he could. His face was red from the heat and work, but he was smiling bigger than ever. When he saw James, he waved excitedly. "Sergeant Cooper, come here, you need to see this." As James walked through the crowd, people started pointing and whispering. "That's him," he heard someone say, "the soldier from yesterday." James felt uncomfortable with all the attention, but he kept walking until he reached the stand. Mike pointed to his phone, which was propped up next to the cash register. "Look at this. The videos from yesterday went viral." The screen showed one of the cell phone videos from the fight, and it had over 1 million views. The comments were full of people praising James and sharing the video. "Local hero soldier teaches bullying bikers a lesson," Mike read from another website. Local news sites had picked up the story, and people were sharing it all over social media. Some people in line had come from other towns just to see the place where it happened. James shook his head, not wanting to be famous. "Mike, I just did what anyone would do," he said quietly, but Mike wouldn't hear it. He showed James something else. His sales numbers from that morning were already higher than any full day before. "You saved my business, Sergeant," Mike said, his eyes getting wet. "Those bikers were scaring away all my customers. I was thinking about closing down. But now look," he waved at the long line of people waiting to order. "Everyone wants to eat at the hot dog stand the soldier protected." A young boy in line pulled on his mother's sleeve, pointing at James. "Mom, is that the soldier from the video? The one who beat up the bad guys?" His mother tried to quiet him, but James smiled and waved at the boy. Just then, a police car pulled up. Officer Martinez stepped out, now wearing his regular uniform instead of the patrol uniform from yesterday. He walked up to James with a serious look on his face. "Sergeant Cooper, we need to talk," he said. James felt worried for a moment, but then saw Officer Martinez smile. "Those bikers you dealt with yesterday. Turns out they were wanted in 3 other counties for similar incidents. They've been going around threatening small business owners for months." The officer showed James some pictures on his phone. The Steel Serpents had been caught trying to leave town late last night. They had packed up their clubhouse and were planning to move to another city, but the police were waiting for them. "We found drugs, stolen money, and illegal weapons in their clubhouse," Officer Martinez explained. "Thanks to you standing up to them, we finally had the evidence and witnesses we needed to take down their whole operation. The chief wants to give you a civilian commendation." James tried to refuse the award, but Officer Martinez insisted. "The ceremony will be next week. The mayor wants to be there too." More people in line were taking pictures now, and James could hear them talking excitedly about seeing the hero from the video. Mike called out from his stand, "Hey, Everyone. This is the man who saved my business. Free hot dogs for all active military personnel today. The crowd cheered, and several soldiers who were in line looked surprised and happy. A local news van pulled into the parking lot, and a reporter with a camera crew started setting up. James looked at Mike with a worried face. "I should go," he said. "I need to get to the base." Mike understood and quickly made James his usual chili dog to go. As James walked back to his car, people in line clapped and thanked him. He heard one man say to his friend, "See, that's what a real hero looks like, humble and just doing the right thing." James got in his car and took a bite of his hot dog. It was perfect, as always. As he drove away, he could see in his mirror that the line at Mike's stand was now stretching around the corner. Sometimes, he thought, doing the right thing has bigger effects than you expect. A week later, James stood uncomfortably in his dress uniform outside City Hall. He had polished his boots until they shined like mirrors and made sure every medal and ribbon was perfectly straight. The mayor had organized a special ceremony to honor him, even though James had tried to say it wasn't necessary. The steps of City Hall were crowded with people. News cameras were set up in front, and reporters were talking into microphones. James saw Mike in the crowd, wearing a clean white shirt instead of his usual work apron. The old lady from the hot dog stand was there too, sitting in a special chair in the front row. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor said into the microphones, "we are here today to honor a true hometown hero." She was a short woman with gray hair, but her voice was strong and clear. Staff Sergeant James Cooper showed us what real courage looks like. James stood at attention while the mayor told the story of what happened at Mike's hot dog stand. She talked about how he had protected the community and helped the police catch dangerous criminals. James noticed some of his fellow soldiers from the base had come to watch. They stood in their uniforms at the back of the crowd. Officer Martinez stepped up to speak next. "The steel serpents have been causing trouble in our city and 3 other counties," he explained to the crowd. "Thanks to Sergeant Cooper's actions, we were able to arrest 12 gang members and close down their illegal operations completely." The police chief came forward holding a shiny medal. "This is the Civilian Service Medal," he said, "given to citizens who go above and beyond to help our community." He pinned the medal on James's uniform while everyone clapped and cheered. Mike was called up to speak too. His eyes were wet with tears as he talked about how his business had been saved. "Sergeant Cooper didn't just stop some bullies," he said. "He showed us that one person standing up for what's right can make a big difference." The crowd grew quiet as James finally stepped up to the microphones. He had prepared a short speech, trying to keep it simple and honest. "Thank you for this honor," he began, "but I'm not a hero. I just did what I was trained to do, what any soldier would do." He looked out at all the faces watching him. A hero is someone like Mike, who works hard every day to serve his community. A hero is like Officer Martinez, who protects our streets. Heroes are the teachers, firefighters, nurses, and everyday citizens who help others. James pointed to his medal. "This belongs to all of us," he said, "because when we stand together against bullies and criminals, we make our community stronger. That's what really matters." The crowd clapped louder than ever. Some people wiped tears from their eyes. The mayor smiled and shook James's hand, telling him his speech was perfect. News photographers took pictures as James stood with the mayor, police chief, and Mike. After the ceremony, many people wanted to talk to James and shake his hand. The old lady from the hot dog stand gave him a box of homemade cookies. Some young children asked to see his medal, and he bent down to let them look at it up close. James's commanding officer from the base came to congratulate him. "Well done, Sergeant," he said with a proud smile. "You represented the army well." Some of James's fellow soldiers teased him about being famous, but he could tell they were proud too. Mike had brought his hot dog cart to City Hall, giving out free hot dogs to everyone after the ceremony. The line was long, but people were happy to wait. They talked about James's speech and how the city felt safer now that the steel serpents were gone. As the crowd started to leave, James helped Mike clean up the hot dog cart. "You know," Mike said, "my stand has been busier than ever this week. People come from all over to eat where the famous soldier fought the bikers." He laughed. "But you'll always be just James to me, the guy who likes his hot dogs with extra chili." James smiled, grateful that at least one person still treated him normally. He looked at his new medal, shining in the afternoon sun. Maybe being a hero wasn't about doing big, dramatic things. Maybe it was just about being ready to do the right thing when the moment came. A month had passed since the ceremony at City Hall. Life was slowly getting back to normal for James. The news vans had stopped coming around, and fewer people asked to take selfies with him. Mike's hot dog stand was still busier than before, but the long lines had become manageable. James sat at his usual table outside the stand, enjoying his lunch break. The weather was perfect, not too hot, with a gentle breeze moving through the trees. Mike was telling him about his plans to buy a second hot dog cart when they heard motorcycles approaching. Everyone at the stand got quiet. Some people looked worried, remembering what happened last time bikers showed up. But these motorcycles sounded different, newer, cleaner. 5 bikes pulled into the parking lot, and James immediately noticed something special about them. These weren't gang members. Each bike had American flags and military veteran stickers. The riders wore leather vests too, but theirs had Veterans Motorcycle Club patches on the back. They parked their bikes neatly and walked toward the stand with respect. The leader was an older man with white hair and a neat beard. He walked with a slight limp, probably an old war injury. When he saw James in his uniform, he stopped and gave a perfect military salute. James stood and returned the salute. "Staff Sergeant Cooper," the older man said, "I'm John Williams, retired Marine Corps. We've been hoping to meet you." He held out his hand, and James shook it firmly. The other veterans lined up to shake his hand too, each introducing themselves. They were all veterans from different branches of the military, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. They had seen the video of James standing up to the steel serpents, and it had meant something special to them. "We protect small businesses in our own way," John explained as Mike served them all hot dogs. "We escort veterans' funerals, raise money for military families, and keep an eye on places that might have trouble with real bike gangs." The veterans sat with James, sharing stories about their service time. They laughed about how the steel serpents had run away after the fight. "Those guys give real bikers a bad name," one of the veterans said. "We're here to show people what motorcycle clubs should really be about." Mike brought out extra hot dogs, refusing to take any money from the veterans. "Friends of Sergeant Cooper eat free," he insisted. The veterans tried to argue, but Mike wouldn't listen. Finally, they agreed to let him take a picture of their whole group instead. As they ate, John told James about their club's latest project. They were organizing a charity ride to raise money for a local veterans hospital. "We'd be honored if you join us," he said. "Not as a celebrity, but as a fellow service member." James thought about it. He had never ridden a motorcycle before, but something about these men made him want to learn. They represented everything good about military service: honor, brotherhood, and helping others. "I don't have a bike," James said, but John just smiled. "We can teach you to ride," he offered. "Several of us are certified instructors. Once you learn, you'll love it. There's nothing like the freedom of the open road." The other veterans nodded in agreement. They told him about their monthly rides to visit veterans' homes, their work with military children, and their community service projects. This wasn't about being tough or scary. It was about continuing to serve even after leaving the military. Some customers at the hot dog stand were watching them, but not with fear like before. People smiled seeing the veterans together, appreciating how different they were from the steel serpents. A few people even came up to thank them for their service. As the veterans got ready to leave, John handed James a card with their club information. "Think about it," he said. "We meet every Thursday night. You'll always be welcome." They all shook hands again, and the veterans started their bikes. The sound of their motorcycles was different from the steel serpents, proud and strong, not threatening. As they rode away, James looked at the card in his hand. Maybe this was another way he could help his community, not by fighting bad guys, but by joining good men doing good work. Mike watched the veterans leave too. "Now those are the kind of bikers we like to see," he said with a smile. "Regular heroes, just like you, Sergeant." James nodded, thinking about how one small action could lead to unexpected friendships and new opportunities to serve. 6 months had passed since the day James first stood up to the steel serpents. A hot summer had turned into a cool autumn, and many things had changed. Mike now had 2 hot dog stands, the original one and a new cart downtown. The old lady who liked extra mustard had become a daily customer, always bringing cookies for James when he visited. Today was special. James pulled into the parking lot on his new motorcycle, a beautiful black Harley Davidson with military service stickers on the sides. He had taken John's offer and learned to ride with the Veterans Motorcycle Club. Now he wore his own leather vest with the club's patch, but always kept it neat and clean like his military uniform. Mike was extra busy today, cooking hot dogs at his original stand. It was the day of the Veterans Charity Ride, and hundreds of bikes would be passing through. James had helped organize the event, which would raise money for the local veterans hospital. As James parked his bike, he saw a familiar face watching from across the street. It was Snake, the former leader of the Steel Serpents. But Snake looked different now. He wore regular clothes instead of gang colors, and his face was cleaner, less angry. Snake crossed the street slowly, his hands in his pockets. People at the hot dog stand got quiet, remembering the fight from 6 months ago. But James could tell something was different about Snake's walk. He wasn't trying to look tough anymore. "Sergeant Cooper," Snake said quietly when he reached James. "Got a minute to talk?" James nodded and walked with him to a quiet table. Mike watched carefully from his stand, ready to call the police if needed, but James gave him a reassuring wave. "I got out of jail last week," Snake explained, looking down at his hands. "Did some thinking while I was in there. Watched that video of our fight about 100 times. He paused, taking a deep breath. "I was wrong. About everything." James listened as Snake told his story. In jail, he had met a counselor who was a Vietnam veteran. The counselor had helped Snake understand how his anger was hurting himself and others. Snake had even earned his GED while in prison. "I saw what you did with that Veterans Club," Snake continued. "Saw how real bikers are supposed to act. Made me ashamed of what we were doing with the Steel Serpents." He pulled something from his pocket. It was a 6-month sobriety chip from AA. Just then, the sound of many motorcycles filled the air. The Veterans Motorcycle Club was arriving for the charity ride. Dozens of bikes pulled into the parking lot, American flags flying proudly. John, the club president, walked over to James and Snake's table. "Everything okay here, Sergeant?" John asked, looking at Snake carefully. James nodded and stood up. "John, this is Snake. He has something he'd like to say to the group." Snake looked surprised but stood up too. In front of all the veteran bikers, Snake apologized for what the Steel Serpents had done. His voice shook a little, but he kept talking. He told them about getting sober in jail, about wanting to change his life. When he finished, the parking lot was quiet. John looked at the other veterans, then back at Snake. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said. "If you're serious about changing, we know some people who can help. There's a veterans job training program at the hospital we support." Snake's eyes got wet. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "I want to do something good for a change." James put a hand on Snake's shoulder, remembering how they had first met as enemies. Now they were just two men talking about a better future. Mike called out from his stand, "Hot dogs for everyone." On the house. The veterans cheered, and even Snake smiled a little. As everyone lined up for food, James looked around at how much had changed. The old lady was sharing her cookies with young veteran riders. Mike was teaching Snake's daughter, who had come to support her dad, how to put the right amount of mustard on a hot dog. John was showing James's commanding officer from the base the plans for their next charity event. James sat on his motorcycle, getting ready to lead the charity ride. 6 months ago, he had just wanted a quiet lunch at his favorite hot dog stand. Instead, he had found a new way to serve his community, helped change someone's life, and learned that sometimes the best victories don't come from fighting at all. As the bikes roared to life and the ride began, James smiled. Mike's hot dog stand had become more than just a place to eat. It had become a place where people could change, where enemies could become friends, and where a simple act of standing up for what's right could start something much bigger than anyone expected.